we can start with a more artistic version of the question that everyone is sort of asking each other right now as soon as you start an email or enter a Zoom of like, how are you holding up? But I guess the question is more like, what is your practice? What does your creative practice or your creative life look like right now in this time that we're in?
In this very peculiar new time that we find ourselves in, actually, what had become my practice just ended this week because I've been teaching, and with very little, time to prepare for it, I had to figure out how to teach my classes at 2 universities remotely. And since they're studio classes that would normally meet in studio, how to configure. There were 3 different classes and 2 sections of one of those classes. So I had about 60 students that I had to somehow prepare and figure it out. And actually juggling, so it became also about my teaching practice. A lot of it was about my teaching practice, like how was I going to be able to adapt, and I had to, how to adapt one's teaching practice to do it in this incredibly strange way. It's like
within a few days, it seems
within
like.
literally,
yeah.
NYU was on their spring break, and I felt really bad for the students because literally their stuff was still in the dorms. Their stuff had to get packed by someone else and mailed to them because they couldn't come back to New York. So, and I had to figure out okay, and that class, the NYU class, was a new class. It was because it's not quite a quarter. They're on half semesters at ETW, at Experimental Theater Wing, where I teach. And so I'd never met these people in person. The classes at UArts in Philadelphia were 2 ongoing classes. So I had met them and they had been going forward. So yeah, figuring that out. And it was a lot to figure out, both just simple nuts and bolts, like the technology, because I'm vaguely computer literate, but not that computer literate, oh my God, how do I do this? But also how to engage people in their own choreograph. And the NYU class was first year projects. So they're freshmen, college freshmen, making their first pieces. And it's a mentoring thing. It's, teaching them and giving them ideas and input and correction and help. And it was interesting. I think it was fairly successful, I must say.
That's good.
And the classes at UArts, one was student choreography workshop, also a mentoring thing that I was sharing with Michael Sheridan, another professor there. And the students actually rose to the occasion. And it brought up this did bring up a question though, obviously more people would see my work on video than would see it live anyway, and in the live venues I perform in. But now it seems that particularly students of the current generation, the 18 to 22-year-olds are very literate. They made incredible pieces for the first. I couldn't do it, with my phone. They were making these pieces with their phones that were incredibly intelligent and well crafted in most cases. So, is this going to change the idea of live art, both in theater, dance, performance art? Is this going, I mean, it was already shifting that way. Is this going to push it and
Yeah, well, when those people are in their 30s and 40s, for being professionals, they're going to have a totally different idea of what, and they're already a generation that grew up with computers completely.
Right.
I am sort of the first generation that had computers from very young, but I didn't I wasn't 3 years old looking at a laptop, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, we still had a rotary phone in my childhood, So yeah, I feel like they already have a certain literacy with it. And then on top of that, just these kids who are in college, that age range where they're what is art practice? What is dance? What is performance? I totally agree. I think they're gonna see possibilities that the rest of us, even those of us that are pretty computer literate or interested in digital art in some way, couldn't think of, because they're gonna have come of age as artists thinking in this way already, or it's also possible that I'm seeing some folks kind of turn away from the digital in this, you know, like as an alternative to the live, to actually think about like the analog or the manual, or like mail art, return of the mail art, or like the, you know. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
it's all just,
I've been thinking of it in terms of my own art practice. It's my
yeah.
art practice, you know, at 60 whatever years, it's that going to have to shift, you know, to like, okay, do I have to become more literate in terms of like visual and video art? Can my work, you know, can I, and part of it, I mean, I'm excited about the possibility, like, oh, I can collaborate with somebody in Australia now, and we don't have to fly, you know, 20 hours to do it, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's so funny, there was like a little movement which had it was problematic, I thought, a bit in terms of the privilege it implied, but some European artists were starting to be like, I'm not going to do tours by plane anymore because of the footprint, you know, the sort of ecological footprint of that travel. And so, you know, it's already on some folks' mind to try to find other ways anyway. I don't know that it was yielding super fascinating art or anything, but maybe it now will, because it'll be more normalized, and there will be more, you know, it also won't be an oddity anymore, right. I think.
But what came up in the teachings at the two universities is, so these are university students that come from a broad but fairly narrow demographic, but it brought up like the idea of access and privilege, because there were people who would attend, and they were using wonky Wi-Fi, and they couldn't get on, they kept getting knocked off, they didn't have like the latest technology, the latest laptop, the latest camera, the latest editing software, so there were people and these are like people who are going to university. So we talk about people beyond that demographic.
Ishmael,
what does
can
that
you say
mean?
that last thing again?
Already in life art.
You broke up for a little bit. Can you say that last thing?
Oh, just sort of, like, what does that mean to the broader demographic? I mean, already in live art, there is a disparity or division between who has access, who has privilege to go to a theater, to buy, a $20 theater ticket. But, when we come to people who, might not have digital capabilities, and it was already showing up in those classes that there were people who, there were people who had, and I could show you some incredible work that some of the students did, and I could show you some people just didn't have it. And so, and this is a demographic of people who are attending university. So what does that mean to people who are not in that demographic, who are in a less privileged demographic?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder if like the fanciness of the editing doesn't necessarily mean that the work is more strong ultimately, like there's something that hopefully will start to get figured out in the way that, you like, as I understand it, like in New York, at least, studio space starts to become really hard to come by in the 90s, and in a way that it hadn't been in the 80s maybe. And so, and of course the NEA, money dries up and all of that happens, and so the field starts to change, and people are working with a different kind of resource, and so the work looks different, right? I feel like improvisation has become so important, and you were already doing that, but like then other people are like, okay, I guess we'll make a score, instead of a piece in the way that we used to, like that sort of lavish.
No, I mean, I think it has, it has, no, I think it has both positives and negatives to it, and I'm just sort of being aware of that it can open up a whole new world of possibilities, but it can also be sort of, it could cut more people out,
Yeah, totally. It's just another way. It's like there's just now more ways for people to be cut out or have possibilities opened up.
Exactly.
Like, studio space is still a problem, but now we also have digital access, and just the fact that, like most venues or whoever are creating programs only really started doing these things that would have made it accessible, at least to some more people digitally. People who can't buy the ticket, some of them at least do have internet access, right? And so before, digital was understood purely to be a way of making things more accessible for a lot of venues,
Right.
and wasn't happening. Like that wasn't enough of a reason. You know what I mean? So now it's like, okay, we have to really at least do digital, you know,
Right.
as well as live. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I was struck by what you said about, you know, the answer to this question about your creative practice was your teaching practice. And I feel like that's something that runs through your whole career, that there's like the way I understand your sort of artistic practice is like sort of three-pronged, that there's your dance, moving, choreographic practice, there's your teaching practice and mentoring practice, and then there's like this connectivity work that you do to either curate or, you know, sort of frame things and bring people together and have ideas in the field, you know, and maybe like sitting on panels and writing things kind of fall between the teaching and the, you know, fall in all of those a little bit, or maybe that's the fourth prong, I don't know. But I feel like that's a really unique thing about your career, is that you kind of, and which I also admire, because I feel like I'm, you know, trying to find my way through multiple prongs all the time too, you know. So I guess, I don't know, what is the question I'm asking? Like, how have you experienced all these different prongs over the years, and what was it that sort of made you sort of decide to have these, to operate in that way? Or was there a decision? Was it just what you naturally wanted to do? Also, is your beard blue?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, is that the light, or it's great.
It's fading. It was much brighter a while ago.
Uh,
I don't know if there was a decision, as in like, oh, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to have these 3 prongs or 4 prongs. It was sort of where my interests went. It was fairly recently that I really began thinking of my teaching practice as an important element of my artistic practice. It was, you know, it started off like many people in the field. It was like a way to make money. Not a lot of money, but some money to support myself that, you know, didn't involve waiting tables, which I did also. So it was that, but I realized, and I'm sort of embarrassed to admit it, fairly recently, within, you know, the decade, that, oh, this is also something that I do and know how to do, and developing and mining and changing and evolving with. Especially the teaching of both improvisation and composition. Those are both really, and I'm still trying to write about that. I still have this sort of book that I'm supposed to be writing and have not. I'm just a horrible, lazy person when it comes to putting things down. But I really want to talk about that. I really want to, like, because I think I have a wealth of knowledge about that. And so it wasn't, you know, that was a slow, it wasn't a decision. It was like, I just began thinking, oh, that was part of it. The advocacy is part of like who I am. That prong is sort of like, I mean, it stems to my political involvement from a very early age, that I was political activist, and sort of like that kind of like connectivity just made sense. And also writing was something that I've always done. I was an English major during my college stint. So writing in language has always been an important part. And then creating, you know, and making stuff and performing and dancing and choreographing and improvisation have always been, that was what I used to think, that was how I used to self-identify, and the other stuff was this sort of ancillary stuff. And all of a sudden I realized, as you just said it, and it was interesting that, you know, that it has actually sort of coalesced at this point, like all of those things are equally important and I'm going to say codependent, there must be another word.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I know what you mean.
They support each other.
Yeah. Do you feel like your teaching has affected your sense of studio practice, or whatever that might look like to you right now, or before COVID? I don't know. Like your sense of like artistic collaboration. I feel like you were also making work with other people more so recently, is my sense too, in the last 10 years, you know?
I don't know. I think I always made work with other people a lot, actually, sure. But I always laugh at studio practice because my vision of what that means is so different from what I actually do.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I so rarely walk into a studio alone and do something. I just don't. I was showing that video of Fred Holland and me at Contact 10th and 2nd from 1983. And I was telling my students, as I was showing it to them, that Fred and I sometimes would rent rehearsal space and we would wind up lying on the floor and not doing very much. But then at 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd go out to the Pyramid Club and just, drink beer and dance. And that was our studio practice then.
I love that. That's actually amazing.
Yeah, it was like basically that was what we did. We would go out to the club, we go to the Palladium, the Pyramid, and just dance all night, and that was our studio practice. And when we would try to actually do quote unquote studio practice, rent a space for 2 hours and maybe play some music and maybe try some stuff out. It didn't work for us.
Right. I've seen that video you're talking about. I also watched in my New York, whatever it's called, what's it called? The New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, the dance division. I got to watch the Jacob Pillow performance the two of you did. I've been working on writing about it. So I think it's 1986.
I think, yeah.
And you were there for probably a couple weeks or something?
Like 3 weeks, probably, yeah.
Yeah, and you did, as I understand it, I've seen 2 videos of 2 performances on the outdoor stage at Jacob's Pillow. Okay. I don't know if there's more than that. No.
I don't
okay.
know.
And yeah, so there's at least 2 performances of varying degrees of, success and potency, I would say. But what was I going to say about that? Oh, I have the program notes here. Let me see if I can screen share it with you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's cute. Politically inspired and often autobiographical. Love that. Blending contact improv with narrative.
Where is this from?
This is from the Jacob's Pillow program notes.
Really? I've never seen this. I mean, I obviously saw it then, but I haven't seen it since then.
Yeah, this is pretty, I love it. I love it so much. I'm like, that's such a perfect summary of what is going on here.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Cuties on the right. Yeah, with your little rolled up jean situation.
Yes. The Spurs.
I can't read it. Sorry about that. Oh, you have Spurs on too?
Yeah. We did contact conversation with metal spurs on our boots.
It makes me so nervous. Oh my gosh.
You should send those to me.
I will, yeah. Anyway, seeing that video, I was interested in the kind of combination, like I totally see before I read those program notes, I see what they're saying about like the political piece and combined with contact improv, combined with, like this like map that you all were figuring out. And then I'm like, okay, hearing you say this part of that comes from the advocacy and activism you were already doing as a young person, even before that. And like, then the choice to operate within this dance world too, like, I don't know, I'm curious about like, if activism or at least a sense of political, excitement is fundamental to what your thinking was. Like, how did you end? Yeah.
Just sort of, just a little bit of history. I think the first demonstration I ever participated in was when I was a junior in high school. It was during the Vietnam War, and there was a group of I lived in central Pennsylvania, so there was a Quaker meeting near me. I grew up Baptist, and they were holding a Saturday. Every Saturday, they held a silent vigil where they held up a sign against the war in Vietnam. And I don't remember what drew me to go, but I went and began standing silently with them. And then I joined the Harrisburg Area Peace Center, which I would man this. It was like a very small storefront with a lot of leaflets and pamphlets and books. And I would sit there in the evening doing my homework, and people would come in and I would talk about the war in Vietnam with them. And that was when I was in high school. And my parents were not actively politically active. I mean, they were African American during a time in the I grew up in the
Yeah.
60s, and so they were sort of passively active, which makes no
Yeah.
sense at all.
But no, but like being alive
Mm.
was pretty activist, I feel
Right.
like at that time
Right.
for them, you know, like
You know,
being
and the pastor at our church was sort of, MLK light, maybe,
yeah.
in the local scene in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I had that as a background, but I was a theater kid in high school, and then I started taking my first dance class when I was like 16, because the community theater there was offering free dance classes to teenagers because they wanted to get teenagers to dancing in their productions, basically. So I did sort of like jazzy, stage.
Yes.
Like, sort of,
Was that a little West Side Story I just saw
like,
there?
it was like jazz. It was like, pizzazz, jazz hands. And it was sort of a mixture of what I figured out later in life was sort of Horton mixed with sort of a bastardized West African, mixed with, sort of stagey jazz, all of that all in one class twice a week. And I loved it because suddenly I didn't have to memorize lines, and I got to sweat a lot because I had a lot of energy, but I didn't like sports. So
Yeah.
it was
But
great.
the lines thing is also why I decided not to do theater. I took some theater classes when I was younger, and in high school I did theater straight through, but I was like, I can learn a dance phrase. I cannot learn these lines.
Yeah, so when I went to college, I went as an English literature major, and but I did have, and also an English drama major. Actually, there was no dance program at the school because I hadn't thought of dance as something I would do, and but I wound up doing a lot. I hung out with sort of the freaks and hippies, and did a lot of like street theater. And the people knew that I found out that I could move. I had a dance background, so I would often do things at protests, and
When you say street theater and when you say you would do things at protests, what do those two things mean exactly?
it's sort of hard to remember. Like, there would just be actions. There would be people in, costumes doing things, lying down or, doing sort of like, they were at demonstrations, sort of enlivening the demonstration so people weren't just standing around or just marching.
Yeah. Got it. Did you choreograph things for other people to do, or were you just doing weird stuff?
I don't think I ever choreographed. I did, I did do a couple of performances in sort of what was experimental theater there. That's when I started thinking of that, improvisation, because I'm also not, as well as not being able to memorize lines, I really am sort of dyslexic left, right. And I have a hard time learning steps to repeat someone else's choreography, which is also why I've gotten into improvisation, actually. One of the reasons I admit it, that's one of the reasons I like moving, I like dancing, I like performing, and I was really horrible at learning other people's choreography. Horrible. So I was in a couple of experimental theater-y things that involved movement. I did something to the Beatles' Sun King,
Yes. Amazing.
It's so weird that I remember that.
And you left Philly. You were in Philly then, right?
No, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Oh, Erie. Okay. So what did you? And then did you go to Philly to join before New York?
A whole chapter missing.
Okay, got it. Go for it. Just tell me the whole thing. Give me the chapter then.
Okay, I was a horrible college student. I did a fair amount of drugs. I won't say a lot of drugs, but I did.
Not the most of everybody, but
exactly with my age, there was hallucinogens and weed and drinking, and not a lot of. I only went to classes I was interested in, and so after my sophomore year, it was during that time in 1971, was my sophomore year at college. There were a lot of cheap airfares for students. There were student airfare tickets. And a friend of mine and I from school decided to go to Europe for the summer. And I came back a year later breaking my
Wow.
parents' hearts because then I dropped out of college. Um, I wound up living in Israel for a year, working on 2 kibbutzim, uh,
Wow.
doing heavy farm work, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was by somehow fluke of chance, both the kibbutzim I worked on were very far left-wing kibbutzim. And I considered myself a young socialist, and I was interested in the kibbutz life, because I'd read Bruno Bettelheim's Children of the Dream, which is about children being raised collectively on kibbutzim. So I was really interested in going. The first one I went on, Lahav, which is in the Negev desert, 25 kilometers north of Beersheba. I lived there for 9 months. It's one of the 2 places in Israel that raises pigs for consumption. So I was a pig farmer when I wound up working in the pig farm in Israel for 9 months, which means I would get up in the morning, have these like fire hoses and wash out the pens, feed them, sometimes help mate them, lead them to the slaughterhouse every Friday, and all kinds.
Wow.
So that was actually what I did for 9 months when I was like 20 years old, in terms of my preparation for becoming a choreographer. And then I left that kibbutz after 9 months and moved to one that was on the Lebanese border in the Galilee, which is really beautiful and very different. And I worked in a banana plantation there. And I took that year I took one dance class. There was, on the second kibbutz where I was, the one that was in the north, on the Lebanese border, there was one American member of the kibbutz. She was a young Jewish woman who was a member, who had been a dancer in the States. And she said, oh, there's a choreographer from Philadelphia who's teaching at a neighboring kibbutz. And she knew that I had danced. She said, do you want to go to the class? And I said, sure. And it was this guy, Gene Hill Sagan, who was from Philly. Brenda Dixon Gottschall writes about him, actually.
Okay.
I think he died of AIDS in the 80s or 90s. And I borrowed tights from a woman who was smaller than me, so the tights didn't fit, and went there. It was like as I recall, again, I wasn't sure, but probably a Horton-y kind of class, and I was terrible in it, but that was the only class I took in over a year, But after working in the bananas, we used to go to the Mediterranean. I used to dance in the beach. We used to go skinny dipping after, 8 hours of working in cutting banana trees and loading them onto trucks. I'd go sort of dancing on the beach at the Mediterranean.
Who was like there with you? Like, were there other Americans like working alongside you? Like, who was it? Like a bunch of hippies? Like, what was the vibe?
The second place, it had been a kibbutz that had failed several times because literally right on the border. Literally, that we were surrounded by Israeli army forces to protect us.
Wow.
And the kibbutz was mostly young, I would say late 20s, early 30s, American, there was very Anglophone. There were either American or English, Canadian or Australian, Jewish people, young people who had come to Israel with a vision to be on kibbutz, but it was also very left-wing and socialist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So that was your choreographic training after Horton Jazz West African combo platter.
Exactly.
And street theater and I mean, were you mostly, when you were younger, were you mostly protesting Vietnam War? Was there other things that was
the most sort of like direct thing.
Yeah.
I started this with other people, started an underground newspaper at my high school. I got kicked off the regular newspaper staff because we formed our own newspaper. I organized sort of a hippie-esque traveling coffee house.
Oh my gosh.
And there was sort of like, I remember my major thing in high school was I sort of brought down the dress code.
Yes, good job.
It didn't happen my year, but I went back the next year and there were people wearing jeans and girls could actually wear pants.
Oh, wow.
Before
Yeah.
that, in the middle of winter in Pennsylvania, they still had to wear skirts.
How did you bring down the dress code?
Protesting and,
Okay. Just protesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So then what's the next phase after your kibbutz phase?
That always has to get sort of acknowledged that year.
Yeah.
So I came back to the States. There was a death in the family, and there was other circumstances. And also, I didn't know where I wanted to be. I was in Denmark for a brief period because a friend of mine, a woman at the kibbutz, was Danish, and I went to visit her, and I had vague thoughts of like going to Uganda or Spain because I heard you could get jobs there.
Whichever.
Yeah.
Totally the same.
And there had been a death of a major person in the family, one of the matriarchs of our family. And my parents made it clear that after this year of foolishness, of me saying I'll be back next semester, and then not showing up, that they wanted me home. And I actually had no money because at the kibbutz, I think we got paid 50 cents a day,
Wow.
and fed and housed,
Right.
as it were. But there were migrant workers, which also fed into my sort of politics and has given me great empathy for migrant workers, having been one myself. So I came home to Harrisburg, and I didn't want to go back to the same college. It had been a very conservative Catholic school in Erie, Pennsylvania. And the person who in high school who had got me into the first dance class, my friend Susan Lurie, was at Temple in Philadelphia. And we talked, and she said, "Oh, I'm living in this house in North Philly, and there's a room available in the basement. Do you want to move to Philly?" And I said, "Sure." And I did, because I knew I didn't want to go to college. And I should say now that my highest educational degree is from William Penn High School, even though I do teach in MFA programs, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually.
And, literally, I don't even have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
But I went to Philadelphia, lived in this house with some Temple students. Susan just retired from teaching dance at Wesleyan in Connecticut. And we've remained friends. We've been friends since 6th grade. And she was, I think her major was social work, but she was taking tons of dance classes because she'd always danced. So at that point, there were very few men in the dance department at Temple. So I just began auditing on nobody's books. Like literally, I would go in and start taking classes from like teach.
That sounds like you.
And sort of nobody actually questioned because they were so hungry to have a male body in class. So I took one full semester of ballet. I took improv. I took modern from 2 really good teachers, Eva Golson and Helmut Gottschall, who's Brenda Dixon Gottschall's husband. And then Susan had been going to these Friday night workshops from a group called Group Motion Media Theater in Philly. And
this is what I know of your bio.
Right. So that's sort of like, and then after about a month of going every Friday night and, doing these weird improvs, they weren't that weird actually, but these improvs with like electronic music and slide projections, and anybody could come, and, there wasn't like a class at all. They asked me to be in the company because they were working on a new piece, and they said, "Do you want to be?" And I said, "Sure." I had never even considered being in a dance company or dancing with a company. And with the exception of my loose affiliation with Miguel Gutierrez and the Powerful People, it's the only company I've ever been in.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It does, actually.
Yeah.
I was in that company for like 2 years. And then I formed some loose connections with former Group Motion members, Terry Fox in Philadelphia, Michael Biello, and I formed an all gay men's collective. So there have been collectives that I worked in, Terry and I, and a musician, Jeff Kane, formed a group called A Way of Improvising. And then I sort of found contact improv somehow. There was one teacher at Temple, John Gamble, who brought Steve Paxton and Nancy Stark-Smith and other people, because he had been doing contact, and they came, and I began doing contact in Philly, but there weren't a lot of people in Philly. So I wound up coming to New York once a week and taking class from Danny Lepkoff.
Mm-hmm. So when-ish are we talking about right now? What year?
70s, like
Mid.
I moved to Philadelphia in 1972 and left in 1979.
Okay, so really early in the 70s. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and what was your activism like in Philly then?
It was sort of like, trying to think, it was there in spirit, more, I can't remember. I began to be more concerned with sort of my art. The art sort of took more of a focus. There was sort of like, the activism and the fact that Michael Biello and I formed this group called Two Men Dancing, and it was definitely a gay men's collective. And we made pieces that like focused on sort of like gay men's issue.
Mm-hmm. Is there a documentation of that anywhere?
A little bit. You'll have to find it.
I guess so. Okay, good to know.
There's a tiny bit on my website. TV. There's like a dance that I did with them. And I can send you something else, but there's not a lot of, because that was, very early, that was 70s era video. So there's not a lot of documentation. Mm-hmm. So that was it. Improvisation, actually doing improvisation with Terry Fox and Jeff Kane felt very activist in a very artistic way, because there was we felt very marginalized in the Philadelphia dance scene at that time. There was the dance critic only wrote reviews of the Pennsylvania Ballet. And even in the modern, there was like a split. The people at Temple were, it was before Philadanco. Philadanco formed right as I was leaving, I believe. So sort of we were these weird people who did, improv pieces in the parks, and at the Painted Bride was an alternative dance artist space, or at Terry's Loft in Old City, we didn't do these, we didn't do stage things. We didn't work on stages often. We did when we could. Yeah. It's not that we didn't want to, but we felt really marginalized, but really committed to it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So go ahead.
One of the things I began seeing a therapist at the time, and she felt that I was having a hard time speaking, and she wondered if I knew of any movement therapists. And I did know of one person through a friend of mine in New York. So in addition to coming to New York once a week to take contact classes with Danny Lepkoff, I also came up once a week, the same day to see a movement therapist. So, which involved somewhat what resembles now what authentic movement sort of is now. Like I would move and then I think with my eyes closed, maybe not. And then we would talk about images and issues that came up in my body as I was moving. So that really informed my work, actually.
I mean, I was gonna ask about that, because speech is such a part of your work, actually, and like aligning speech and movement, and I had always interpreted it as like just the general aura of like score making coming out of the 60s and 70s, you know what I mean? But I guess maybe there's some other thing there. I mean, I'm also like, I didn't even know, I would imagine movement therapists were a sort of new thing at that time, probably. I feel like it's probably a sort of hippie thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I guess she was involved with the founding of LIMS, the Bartinia space.
Yeah.
Diane Levy was her name. So yeah, it was sort of a new practice, and it really did also it began for myself to connect, sort of like my personal autobiography that's mentioned in that Jacob's Pillow thing, was like things that were real things coming up for me in my body, and putting it into speech. And also I had an acting background from high school. I was a theater nerd. So it felt really natural to be speaking in performance and just be speaking of real things in my life. So pieces.
Yeah. I saw the video of Dead that I've told you this before. It was the one you did on Ion Dance, the Ion Dance episode, also probably early 80s. Celia Epiodius' series. I'm just saying that for the people listening to this later. And I mean, it's a really awkward setup because like in the corner is the interview table with like a backdrop, and then like you get up from the table and go do the dance in the other corner of the room, and then come and sit back down and have a conversation with everybody else. And so there's something very weird about that, but and you're like sweating in the conversation, you know. But that's the iconic like language movement piece for me of yours, and I feel like I'm trying to, when I'm writing about it, I'm trying to figure out like how I'm reading the like what it's like you're pinning different people's names that you speak to different I mean, they're all versions of falling, but some of them really don't look like falling. And so it sometimes feels like you're pinning the name to like your elbow as the instigator of the movement, or a different part of your body somehow. Anyway, and so it's like you're creating this structure around yourself that is coming out on these two tracks. One of them is voice and one of them is, you know, movement, but it's always, you know, they're each like a different node. They're very focused. Like, it's like, what's the next name that comes up? Not just any word, but name, you know, like person that I can invoke. And then how do you instigate from a new part of your body, or, you know, anyway.
I think it was like probably less strategic to that, more
I'm sure.
more organic than that. The history of that piece is that I decided to have a big 30th birthday party. And the night before that, I recorded into a Walkman all the deaths I could remember that happened during my lifetime. And I was wrong about some. And when I performed it at my party, which also involved me calling my parents over speakerphone, which was sort of a new technology. It wasn't like you had to put a device onto the phone to make it a speakerphone. Like, it wasn't like the speaker was in the phone. And I talked to my parents during the party. I think I shaved half my beard. I did all these, and it was a big, it was at a friend's loft, my friend Lissy's loft. But then I decided that I would play the recording that I'd made of the dead people. I think the one at Ion Dance, I had actually refined the list. Actually, it wasn't the original raw list. I actually edited it somewhat. And my task was to fall and get up before the next, and to actually feel what that death felt like to me. Like what that name, how it resonated, and how it resonated differently with different people. There's some pets in it also, a couple of turtles and cats. Yeah, it was more like, okay, if I'm gonna have this feeling, like the name, you know, Kathy's sister, like how you know, and some of them had real resonance. Some of them were relatives and friends, and some of them were movie stars, you know, and politicians that I never met. But, you know, your voice, are you muted? You're muted.
Yes, they each have like a resonance that then you were translating like reactively, like right then.
In the moment, it was an improv. It was a very structured improv, but it was an improv piece. And I actually taught it to someone in Philadelphia.
You told me, William
Robinson in 2010. So I don't think I wrote down the instructions. We just talked about how to do it, you know, how to create his list, which because of his age, there are no overlaps, but there are overlaps in types of people. Like there's a pope in his and a pope in mine, but they're different popes, you know?
Yeah.
Or different rock stars, or, you know, or grandparent, you know, like, you know.
Totally. Yeah. Right. Well, it's also like, it's history, you know, it's like, it's like someone's personal history, the nebula of like networks and people around them, and then reacting in the moment to that. Yeah, totally. Okay, this is bringing me to another. I'm honing a project I'm working on, which is about what are the connections between sort of 60s and 70s Black activism and HIV/AIDS era activism, and how do the art, and they're not necessarily like overlaps of people or like very necessarily direct lines of influence, but I'm just thinking about like your generation who's making work in the 80s mostly, you know, is also sort of standing on the work that was done before, so that, you know, race sort of was operating in a different way by the time you get to 70s and 80s, right? And what does that mean also to think about folks who were maybe also queer in the 60s, but involved in the Black Power movement or the Black Arts movement, right? So just thinking about these like different strategies for activism and for collective effort and how they sort of happen in dance and in performance. So I'm just trying to draw lines like that. And it was really beautiful to hear you or to see you post about the Kent State protests the other day, and like this, you know, this anniversary and of those, and that being an instigating factor for you as an activist. And just to kind of put that in the timeline, I had never really thought, like knowing what I know about your history, I never really thought about you in this bigger timeline so clearly before. And I know that was more of the Vietnam War protests, but they're super connected to like civil rights and stuff. So
yeah, I during that time also, that was during my brief 2-year stint as a college student.
Right.
Yeah,
so you were in college when it happened.
Yeah, I was like literally stenciling red fist on the walls of the administration.
Amazing.
I also belonged to the Association of Black Collegiates at this college. It's Gannon College, which is now Gannon University. It's a small conservative Catholic school in Erie, Pennsylvania. But being a member of I remember being a member of and there weren't very many Black students there. And I remember we took over the president's office. I can't even remember what the incident was that brought us there, but like some racially tinged issue, as they happen to happen all the time, had happened. And I remember being like literally in the president's office, you know, sitting down and, you know, literally packed in there.
Yeah.
So there was sort of crossover. I mean, there was crossover, definitely.
Totally.
I think AIDS activism was informed by 1960s Black civil rights activism. I think just the idea of the protest, that I think people who would not be inclined to have protested use that as a model, use 60s Black civil rights protests as a model, and how AIDS in the 80s, how those protests happened. In terms of art, I think my work was greatly influenced by the AIDS epidemic. Just because I knew people, I was close to people. I've spoken about this and curated made about this. It was a very, I mean, it was a sort of like, it was a defining moment, as this might be right now what we're going through. It might be a defining moment, like in 20 years, people might look back at this period and saying, oh, that was defining, something that was really defining. You know, I really cringe away from like doing work that was political work. Like I really hated that term, that this is a political work, that it sort of like took the art out of it.
That they had to be opposite somehow or
and I
separate.
think my work often, mainly going back to the therapy, that the work often came out of what I call autobiographical fiction, that it's like using the sort of facts of my life, but honing them and making them art, you know, not being confessional, or, you know, of really honing them and crafting those ideas. Going just a quick like back, I remember in the 70s when I was coming up to New York and I would see performances. I remember seeing Colored Girls when it was still at the Public, but I also saw Trisha Brown at the Public, and I remember she was doing accumulation with talking plus water motor, and it was the first time I actually saw someone actually in a dance context speaking or using speech in a work. And I think that piece really greatly influenced me, because I think I went back to Philadelphia and all of a sudden the improvs I did suddenly had like talking in them. I think Terry Fox was really confused by that. Suddenly I was like, in the middle of our dance improvisations, I'd start babbling about something.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the two-man dancing work, there was also language. There was also often language, spoken language. So that's just something I remembered that was an important touchstone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brings me to a question that I wrote, which is, what's your family tree, like your, dance family tree or something, or your artistic family tree, maybe more broad than dance. But I feel like Fred Holland is in the family tree. It's really interesting to hear that Water Motor is in this, like Trisha Brown is in the family tree, which I didn't know before, and that, for Color Girls and Bazaki Shange's piece is in the family tree. Like it's like what comes before you, who is alongside you collaborating, and this, I'm thinking of course of like the project we did with Ralph and Bibi,
right.
But then, and those peers, but also like who's like below you in the family tree, like who would what would be some, yeah.
I think like a major influences, I think seeing Judith Jamison do Albanelli's Cry was like a major event for me. Like, I think it's a really powerful piece. It hit me. Yeah. I had heard about it through my mother. My mother, for some reason, had gone to see Ailey when I was in high school, perhaps, and talked about that girl, Judy, and how good she was. But I didn't see her until I think I moved to Philadelphia in the 70s. And it just struck me. I actually just watched Revelations on video on YouTube recently for something else, for a reason. And I think, that's probably one of the best American-made ballets ever.
Ever, yeah.
And like, it doesn't get historicized that way ever. But I think in terms of like, a dance work made by an American at a certain time, it's nothing that I would ever want to make, but it's incredibly important and doesn't get the recognition that it should. So Ailey definitely is in there. Early Meredith Monk was very, very important to me.
Did you see her early performances a lot, or what?
I can't remember what. I don't know if I saw Education of the Girl Child. I don't know if I saw Quarry. Can't remember. I remember Dolman Music, which is not necessarily a dance piece, but I remember seeing that when Julius was still young. I think the early duets of Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane blew me away, and are still way important. I was never a big Cunningham follower or person. I wound up working for Trisha Brown also, which is also this weird thing that happened. And her as an intern, an administrative intern for a year. So I actually got to know her pretty well, and it was during.
When was that?
Early 80s. It was during the creation of Set and Reset. So we could track that down. I always forget. Because my mother was so heartbroken that I dropped out of college, I actually decided to go to the Gallatin division at NYU. And so I went there and for a year, and that Gallatin is the sort of university without walls. You create your own program and give them a lot of money and they'll give you a degree. And after a year, I sort of figured out I was doing what I was doing anyway, and I shouldn't be giving NYU money to do it just to get the degree. Yeah. So I dropped out of college yet again. But that 1 year that I was in the Gallatin division, I was an administrative intern for Trisha Brown, and which was a huge learning experience. And also I got to sit in on those rehearsals. I got to go to Laurie Anderson's loft to get her signature for the NEA grant,
That's cool. You brought up Bill T. and Arnie, and I was realizing, because I asked you the other day who the illustrator of that poster for your piece was 1960, 1986
86.
also. A lot happened in 86.
86 was a shelter year. It was a banner year. It was lots.
Yeah.
It was also them. It was just, I always say that was so weird that Adolfo and Maria and them happened in the same year.
It's amazing, actually. It's like exactly what I'm thinking about in this project. I'm trying to, there's also all these like blackface pieces that are happening around the same time. So he also did the set design for Bill T's Uncle Tom's Cabin piece in 1990, which I didn't know.
Right.
But I was like, he did
But like he did the sets for Adolfo and costumes for Adolfo and Maria.
And Maria, right. And I was like, okay, and they're both like these sort of vaudevillian kind of vibe to both of their aesthetics. And yeah, anyway, so I was like, that's wild. So I have to do some more research there. But yeah, I guess I'm curious if, like, I'm thinking about, Bill T's relationship with both like this sort of Black history and then the HIV/AIDS crisis and this network of folks. I don't know. I'm curious.
And also,
like
what Bill T and contact improvisation.
And contact. I know, which everyone forgets. Actually,
I know. But he and Arnie and Lois Welk were doing contact up at, was it Brockport, one of the SUNYs, northern New York.
Yeah. And I guess there's just all these sort of connections that people don't realize are there. And I don't know. I don't know that I have a question there, but I guess thinking of this family tree question, I'm also, for you, because you're such a collaborator with other people, like who are the like siblings in the family tree? Who are the cousins and the, like,
right. Well,
yeah.
Well, definitely Fred Holland and I, we went back to Philadelphia. Like I was his first dance, Terry Fox and I were his first dance teachers because he
Amazing.
graduated as a sculptor. He was when he went to college and graduated as a sculptor. And he was, I think, exhibiting some of his work at the Painted Bride, and Terry and I were performing there. And he said, "What is this?" So he said, "You should come to our studio." And it's very, we were very much in this sort of like hipster, hippie vein. We wore blue jeans and combat, fatigue and jumps, nobody wore, and I guess he asked his girlfriend at the time, like what he should wear to a dance class, and she told him tights. So he showed up in black tights, which was really funny. Fred Holland in black tights. It's just really, really funny for me that he showed up, But our collaboration started like mid '70s, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Went on for decades. Dennis Cooper, definitely.
Right.
As a writer, I admired him greatly, and it was sort of like a weird leap of faith to work with him because I didn't know him at all. He just moved to New York from LA, and people from LA, Tim Miller and Jeff McMahon, knew him from LA. He'd been at Beyond the Baroque. He'd been a sort of a curator at Beyond the Baroque, and had edited Little Caesars, which was a poetry zine. And like I went to a reading of his and was like, I was terrified. It was the most frightening thing I'd ever experienced, in that his reading was just so dark, and I was like immediately attracted to it because it affected me so deeply. And I went up to him and asked him if he'd ever worked with dance, and he said no. And I said, "Oh, we should probably work together."
We should probably work together. That's what you said.
Yeah, I said, okay, we should do something together.
Yeah.
And he didn't. Cool. He had no idea who I was, and he was just. But he been hanging around the PS1. He knew Tim Miller, so he sort of started hanging around PS122. And who else are musicians like Chris Cochran, again from them. And also that meeting was very similar. I sort of knew him vaguely, but I saw him playing at a club 8BC, which is on 8th Street between B and C. It was this burnt out building that was probably very dangerous. We all could have gotten killed in it. It was like and I saw him playing, and I said, I loved what he was doing. And I'd never heard sounds like that coming out of a guitar. And and I think Yvonne Meyer, definitely.
Right.
several of her pieces, and she's been in mine. Stephanie Skura, who's now in Seattle. It's kind of broad. It's sort of like, and then there are people like Miguel Gutierrez, who came in later, who I met when he was still in San Francisco. I met at his going away party when he had decided to move to New York. I was out there for teaching and performing at an improvisation festival. And someone said, oh, it's Miguel's going away party. Do you want to go? And I didn't know who Miguel was. And it was so weird that I showed up at his going away party. And he came to New York, and I knew he had danced with Joe Good in San Fran. And I think Jennifer Lacey did call me and asked me if I knew of any male dancers she was working on a new project. And I said, this kid Miguel just moved into town. He might be available. And they worked, which led him to work with John Jaspers. And,
yeah.
That's
a good family tree.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And there are new people, and they're like
new people.
There are talks now going on. They got interrupted because of the pandemic and the closing down of this building where I'm illegally sitting. But Jonathan Gonzalez and I are in talks about doing something together. So there's this whole new generation of people that I'm interested. And I think that's one thing teaching keeps me sort of like involved, with sort of people as they're coming up. And
right. Yeah. Well, and it seems like being the connector, whether that's advocacy work, curatorial work, teaching, creating collaborations, that seems to run through a lot of the ways that I know you and a lot of people know you, I think. It's like the hinge point is you between like why people are in the room together. And yeah, I mean, I feel like, the work I was doing at MR around, with the Artists of Color Council and all of this, it's like immediately like that happened. And when that started to happen, when that, that we had like first meetings after, like maybe 4 years after Trajal Harrell had tried to start some meetings, like I immediately was like, okay, who are the people that have actually been like at this for a really long time, like just trying to be like among the sort of minority in this weird dance world that I'm in. And you were like the person right at the top of my head. And I think around like maybe a few years before that, the Movement Research Performance Journal with you as the cover artist had come out. And so I didn't know about you before then. And it seemed like that was a pivotal moment with just people really recognizing what you had contributed, because it was so nebulous and you had a finger in every pot, but also like no single clear, like a Ralph Lemon or a B.B. Miller, we can be like, here are the pieces they made and toured for decades. You know what I mean? Like there's a sort of clear, dance contribution, but your network and the way that you've touched the field or people in it is very widespread and not always visible in that really clear cut way. So for me, that PJ was like a pivotal, like, oh, this person,
Yeah, I mean, I think there are like certain touchstones. One is that parallels in 1982, like I was an usher, a volunteer usher at Dance Space Project. And I had read this article, and I think it was called Other Stages. It was like a weekly theater, like rag actually. And B.B. Miller had been, I forget who wrote the article, but B.B. Miller had been quoted. And it was talking about people who were sort of working, Black artists who were working outside of the sort of ALE tradition. And I know.
What was it in?
I think it was called Other Stages. I'm pretty sure that was the name of the magazine. It was like a weekly, sort of like, not sort of a lower end Village Voice, but more geared toward theater, I think. And this, but like I sort of went to Cynthia Hedstrom, who was the director of Dance Space, and saying, I have this idea, like, of people who are not working in the ALE lineage, who are African-American, not working in the ALE lineage. Can I curate this? And I don't think I used the word curate, actually. Can I organize it?
It wasn't, people weren't using it for dance so much.
Right. I think that was one of the first times, I think in the public, it did get used suddenly, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And that was sort of the first time I became aware of that term being used for dance.
Yeah.
And I did it, and I invited Blondell Cummings, BB, Ralph, Fred Holland, Gus Solomons, who had been working with Cunningham in the Cunningham Company, Harry Shepard. And it was just like this sort of like, oh, and we were all really different from one another. And it really sort of showed sort of a breadth of what Black people were expressing, that it wasn't, because people of my mother's generation thought of Black dance as alien.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. It was promoted by the USIA. And their first tours were sponsored by the United States government. They were sending that company all around the world to say, this is American art. In the 60s, which Black people were not living the best life.
Right.
Not
right.
that they now.
That was a complicated choice for them.
It was a very complicated choice. And, but you know, there were those of us who were working in various different forms. And and then when I redid the piece 30 years later in 2012, it was, you know, my rethinking of that. But that has always been in my mind. Like, you know, I'm Black and I'm interested, and I'm an experimentalist, and I'm thinking about that all the time. But that is sort of a through line, actually, that doesn't always appear. And then there's also the issues like from Two Men Dancing in Philadelphia, gay work, that, you know, sexual expression is part of who I am. It's part of my biography, and that shows up in the work as well.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, I had a question now, I can't remember what it was. Well, anyway, okay, I have to go soon, so I'll ask my weirdly worded legacy question.
Okay.
Which is maybe
alive.
more.
I'm still alive.
I know. So it's sort of morbid for me to ask this, and so maybe I'll try to grammatically say it in a way that's not like you know, when you're gone or whatever. But like, what do you think your legacy is? You know, already now, but also like it's, you know, for the future, or what do you want it to be? I guess, you know. There's maybe some obvious things like parallels is certainly one of them that I think people already recognize as part of what you've contributed really clearly to, you know, this world we're in. But I guess I wonder, are there other things? Are there, like, how would you articulate that?
It's hard to think about, you know, like
Totally.
I think I try not to think about it, actually.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, really, I mean, it's true, but I'm aware. I think I've always been a writer, and I've always liked the fact that my writing is out there, and both like I think the work that Judy Hussey Taylor has done in terms of her platform series and the fact of like elevating dance curation to the next level, to another level of, and that the catalogs are really important. And the work I did both for the Parallels 2012, but also for 2016, Lost and Found, I think was really an important thing in editing the catalog and like putting those people together and like looking at sort of the height of the AIDS hysteria before the drug cocktail. 15 years from the sort of New York Times announcing that there was this disease in 1981 to 1996, when the drug cocktails became readily available in the developed world. That, and looking back at that and seeing how that marked a generation, I think was really an accomplishment, and I'm really proud of that. And and there are pieces that, I mean, I think Relatives is a great piece, with the piece with my mother, and Them. I think that the high points were sort of Them and Relatives. Well,
and it, what did you say?
In terms of performance, I think those are like the pieces that I would like to be remembered for,
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, Them, obviously, and it's been restaged so many times that, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that people will remember you for that. But I think, Relatives is really under known, I think, you know, and the piece itself, but also the video, which I still, like, I tell people about that video and who was involved in making that video, and it's like the entire like 60-year-old like zone of famous Black artists is like in that group. It's kind of wild.
We were talking about that yesterday, and I was like, so I said, oh, I have with Judy, because Judy Hussey Taylor at Dance Space wants to have a conversation online about that and showing it. And I was showing her just a production still, and I said, "Oh yeah, Lorna Simpson was the still photographer for." I was like, "She had what?" You know.
I mean, how did that happen? Actually, like, I can't. I mean, because I see those photos and you see the credits, and it's like Lorna Simpson was involved. Kerry James Marshall, was he also? Or was that a different person?
Well,
okay, because there's someone who's like credited with set design somehow, and in the video credits, it doesn't say the full name. It says like Kerry something Marshall or Kerry James or something. But then in the library, like the way they have it archived, it actually tags him. And really? So I was like, is this actually like this famous artist? Like, I mean, it could be wrong. I will happily send you a picture of him and see if you remember him. But and then there was someone else
AJ
who and yes, Arthur Jaffa. Is there someone else?
And the music of Steve, was it Steve Coleman?
Yeah.
The sound.
It's kind of crazy.
You know, it's amazing that And I had no idea. I didn't know Julie at all. Yeah.
Right. And Julie Dash, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like so much of your work is collaborations in general, but a fair number of them are collaborations with white folks. And so to me, to find that this was actually like a whole team of Black people, and the piece is so like tender, and it's like, to me, it's an experimental work that only a Black person could make, because it's like your mother and your family, and this like, there's just something in the ethos of like what lineage means and history means to Black people that is not actually present in the way like American culture always works, you know? It's like this sense of like what's passed down and what am I doing that they couldn't do, or, you know, like all of that is in there. And it's very textured and experiential. Like, it's not like heavy-handed at all. It's just an experience. When you're watching, you're just kind of like, a collage is rolling over me, you know, but it's all in there. Yeah, so I'm just like, how did you end up, like, what party did you go to that like got this collaboration going? Like, what was it, the Pyramid Club? Like, what?
No, I think that was this mainly. I mean, there were people that Julie and AJ. I mean, they were married at the time. I guess they collected them because I was sort of brought in. I mean, the way that series worked, Alive from Off Center worked, was that they would pair choreographers with filmmakers, and I had never heard of Julie Dash. This was before Daughters of the Dust. I didn't know, and she contacted me, and I said, "Oh, I don't know if she contacted me directly or the people from PBS did, but said, you know, sure, you know, yeah, great, it's a great piece." I don't know how, I don't remember how she had heard of the piece actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was really successful. I thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And
it's great in the context of because it was a Bill T. Jones solo post Arnie and a Susan, what'd you say?
Susan Marshall.
Susan Marshall, yeah. Yeah, and so like it's Arms.
Yeah, and Arthur Armijo, I think is his last name, passed away from AIDS also.
Wow. I mean, it's just all in there, you know. I don't remember what year that was, but it's like that piece and Susan Marshall's piece. It's, you know, it's like a piece she had already made, filmed in a space. Like, that's the main premise of the video. And then Bill T, you know, he has some play with camera angles and, you know, and like overlays and different. But he's doing a piece with text. But yours is like, there's, you know, footage from different spaces and different, like, it's all, you know, it really is a really complicated piece of video art. And it was just really interesting to sort of see. Also, Susan's has no text, and you and Bill T both have like this text and this sort of personal autobiographical thing going on. I was just like, whoa, the like way this could be read, these three next to each other, is so fascinating. Yeah. And you're improvising and Bill T's like doing movement. Like he's very like, as far as I remember.
He's a freak.
Anyway, it's fascinating. Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I'm pretty sure I had another question possibly to do with Fred Holland or something. I can't remember, but
always ask about Brother from Another Planet. It's my.
Oh my God, I forgot to ask you about that.
It's my 54 seconds of fame. Come on.
It is, and I still haven't watched it, and I will. There's no doubt I will end up watching it over and over. Yes, you're in the street or something.
Yeah, it was such a fluke of a fluke of a fluke. Marta Renzi, the choreographer Marta Renzi's sister, is John Sayles' partner and also his producer. Marta said to me, they're looking for somebody to do this scene in this film. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure. And I went up with very little direction from John Sayles, actually. Did the scene, and it was over. And
did they give you a prompt? Were they like, just be over there?
This is really true. So I think I was in a John Burns piece at DTW. I remember that I was performing earlier that night, go up to Harlem. I found them in Harlem. I mean, they gave me the address. And there's a film set there. They found some costume for me. And I said, well, what do you want? And he explained the scene to me that the brother was having a vision. He explained the movie about the black alien ex-slave. And
right.
There was this guy on the street, like cracked out of his head. He said, oh, look at that guy, follow him. And I said, okay, John Sayles is a movie director. I'm gonna do it. So I'm following this guy for like about 5 blocks. And I realize I'm in Harlem at that in the 80s. I've walked really far away from the movie set, following some cracked out guy who's like hitting the sidewalk with a stick. And I said, I should get my ass back to where I belong. And then a couple hours later, it was like 2 a.m. They shot the scene. Lady in the neighborhood is yelling at me because they said they're treating you like a dog. Don't do that. Don't do, like she's screaming. It's not on the sound.
Oh my God.
You can't hear it, but like the whole time she's doing it, I'm doing this dance that I'm totally making up based on some idea of a vision that a drugged out alien would be seeing.
I mean, were you supposed to be a character? You were just
Not really. It's supposed to be something that he saw. He is taking drugs for the first time. He's shot up heroin. He's being led around by a Rasta, and he sees me.
Oh my gosh, I love it. It's amazing.
Now his daughter is my assistant. So.
Oh my God. Yes. And speaking of family trees, and also like Alvin Ailey is one of your influences, and Trisha Brown is one of your influences. Like all these.
And
people,
Dana Wright also, which I always forget. But
who did you say?
Dana Wright. She teaches at Bennington now. She hasn't been in the city for a long time. She was in the original Einstein on the Beach. She got a grant. It was the precursor to NIFA, CAPS, C-A-P-S. I forget what it stands for. And part of it is that if you got the grant, you had to teach, or you had to do some community service thing. And she taught this sort of shop and movement that a lot of people from around PS 122 went to. Her work is completely different from anything I would do, but it's sort of based on sort of like somatics and working. And it totally influenced my work so much. Amazing.
Yeah. Wait, what kind of movement did you say? Because you broke up for a second.
Somatic, like more somatic work.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's a lot in here.
Look up in your research, which I haven't been able to find, so you need to find it for me. Yeah, PS1 used to have a summer dance series before it was MoMA PS1. And there was one summer, it was called Art and Social Responsibility, or Dance and Social Responsibility. And I did the piece Visioning on it. And my program notes for that were really interesting because they weren't normal program notes. It listed all my influences at that time. But I've never been able to find, I don't have it in my archives and I can't seem to find it.
Yeah, I wonder if PS1 still has archives back that far.
Maybe. It was
Have you talked to anyone there?
I don't know. And it's like,
yeah.
I just made this long list of like things that I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
that have influenced me.
Okay, well, thank you, Ishmael. This has been very helpful for me, but also hopefully for, history, capital H. That brother from another planet story has to get written down somewhere if it isn't already.
It was crazy. It was nuts.
I'm assuming it's a Black woman yelling at you.
Yeah.
Like somebody's auntie is yelling at you.
Yeah, like, don't do that. You're treating that boy like a dog.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That's
my Lord.
Fueling that dance, but that dance is being fueled by this woman yelling at me.
When I watch it, I'm gonna be imagining that what your inspiration is. All right, Ishmael, this has been really helpful, really great, and hopefully I recorded it properly.
I know, that's always the problem.
Okay, take care. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Stay safe.